Hi, my name is Dr.
Gaukhar Baidildinova.
This video is a part of my lectures on evidence-based medicine and epidemiology. From cross-sectional studies, we move to case control ones. A case control study is a retrospective observational study that compares two groups, one with a specific disease, cases, and one without it, controls. Instead of following individuals over time, researchers look back at past exposures using archival data, patient recollections, or medical records. The key principle is assessing how frequently a potential risk factor appears in both groups. If exposure is significantly higher among cases than in controls, it suggests a possible association between the exposure and the disease. To illustrate, imagine a patient with fever, cough, fatigue, and loss of taste and smell. As a control, we take his coworker from the same building who remains healthy. After investigating, we find that the only major difference is diet. The coworker ate regular food, while the patient consumed bats. Of course, this is an exaggerated example, but it highlights two essential aspects of case control studies. First, they are retrospective, meaning we start with sick individuals and trace back potential causes. Second, the study always begins with cases, people who already have the disease. I found a real study very similar to my example. In 2017 to 2018, there was an outbreak of hepatitis A in 5 Canadian provinces, and 18 cases were reported. The goal was to find out the possible source of the infection. For each case, 3 controls were matched, and suspected that shrimp and blackberries may have been the source of the virus, but there is no longer any way to confirm or deny this theory. Then, there are proposals to provide such, but note that the researchers only put forward a hypothesis and honestly admit that nothing can be said for sure. That's understandable. By the time the hepatitis showed up, by the time it became obvious that this was an outbreak and not an isolated case, by the time the controls were picked up and interviewed, those shrimp and blackberries had long since been eaten or disposed of, if they were fresh. Advantages of case control studies. Since you're also more likely to just interview patients about what happened to them, what they ate, what they did, it's cheap and you can get results quickly. When conditions are unusual, case control studies allow a great deal of information to be obtained from a relatively small number of subjects. When there is a long latency period between exposure and disease, case control studies are the only option. Consider the practical aspects of cross-sectional and cohort studies in evaluating new variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and possible etiologies. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a contagious, fatal neurodegenerative disease caused by prion proteins. It can be contracted by eating cow meat or cannibalism. There are also other ways. The disease is very rare. With fewer than 300 confirmed cases, a cross-sectional study would require about 200,000 subjects to include one symptomatic patient. Given the postulated latency of 10 to 30 years, a cohort study would require both a huge sample size and an entire generation. In case control studies, relatively few subjects are required, so more resources are available to study each. As a result, a huge number of variables can be examined. Thus, this type of research is useful for generating hypotheses that can then be tested using other types of research. Useful, as has already been voiced, in the study of rare diseases, studies allow cases to be identified and comparisons to be made regardless of the prevalence of the disease. In addition, the experimental group can be recruited from specialized clinics or disease registries rather than searching for or expecting cases to appear in a particular risk population. Disadvantages. Disadvantages of case control studies include the inability to generate incidence data through such studies. The main problems with case control studies are intervening variables. These will be discussed later. And biases. Biases can take two main forms. Systematic sampling error. Case control studies can suffer from systematic sampling errors if the selected cases or controls do not accurately represent the general population. For example, patients referred to a teaching hospital may have more severe cases, leading to bias. Similarly, control groups composed of volunteers might differ in age, gender, or socioeconomic status, affecting study validity. Observation and recall bias. Since case control studies rely on retrospective data, both patients and researchers are prone to observation and recall bias. Patients may misremember past exposures, and researchers may unintentionally interpret data in a way that aligns with their expectations. This is much like how our parents recall their childhood, often filled with exaggerated hardships, like walking to school through jungles and fighting off pirates. In reality, people struggle to remember what they ate for breakfast 3 days ago, making recall errors a significant challenge in such studies. I also have 2 paid courses on Udemy. The Critical Assessment of Clinical Studies teaches how to read and critically evaluate clinical studies. It's a very great course. The same as my second course, Scientific Writing, where I tell all the nuances of how to write a scientific article or dissertation. Links are in the description box.